From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I am Estefanía Bravo. This is From the South. A bizarre turn of events unfolded at La Picota prison in Bogotá, Colombia. FARC leader Jesus Santrich has been arrested again just minutes after being freed. Santrich was then flown via helicopter to the Attorney General's head offices, where he's currently being held. Santrich was actually brought out of the prison in a wheelchair surrounded by the police. Then about 2 minutes later, he was wheeled back through the prison gate. The Attorney General's office now claims authorities have uncovered new evidence showing that the drug trafficking crime Santrich is accused of took place after the peace agreements were signed, meaning he can be prosecuted for these alleged crimes in the United States. Earlier in the day, Santrich was seriously wounded but is reportedly in a stable condition. No further details have been released about that incident either. Soon after news broke about the injuries, Bogotá's Regional Supreme Court ordered that Santrich be released immediately. And members of the FARC party have gathered outside the head offices of the Attorney General's office. They are demanding answers about Santrich's health.
This has been an act of treason by the Colombian state. President Iván Duque and his party, along with the Attorney General, have betrayed us, have betrayed our agreements and the decision made by the Special Jurisdiction for Peace.
Who could be behind this?
As I said, it's them. It's not a country that respects the rule of law. This government answers directly to the demands of the United States.
What do you know about Jesus Santrich's health?
We don't know anything. That's why we are here. We have upcoming meetings to discuss the situation. We are in touch with our lawyers to analyze the legal situation. I'm going to stay here waiting for an answer.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro says the negotiations in Norway with the opposition have started positively. Maduro made the announcement during a military march in the Aragua state, where thousands of military personnel reiterated their support for the government and the president.
The ministers have just arrived from Norway. There, they developed a dialogue. I want to thank Norway and its foreign minister for receiving our delegation, because they are supporting this peace process. I believe in dialogue and peace. We are going down that path again. And this is good news. Our ministers came back from Norway with good news. The talks to develop a peace agreement have started. I ask for the support of all Venezuelan people to keep going down the path of peace.
On Thursday, President Nicolas Maduro met with representatives of the International Contact Group as part of his government's efforts to advance a dialogue with the Venezuelan opposition. The contact group also held meetings with various political parties and diplomats in the foreign ministry in Caracas. They discussed international law and sovereignty, talked about setting up a dialogue and how to pressure the United States to lift unilateral sanctions against Venezuela. And speaking exclusively with Telesur, Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza highlighted that Venezuelan authorities have been pushing for dialogue with the U.S. government, adding that their strategy to besiege Venezuela have so far failed.
We hope that the U.S. understands our stance. We have sent messages to them saying that diplomacy must be respected. We have said this to Mike Pompeo, to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. We've told him that it's time to restart diplomacy. All their strategies have failed. They are trapped in a maze with no exit. They have been stumbling over and over again. We are ready and willing to have talks, to sit down and reestablish respect.
Let's take a look at how Venezuela's new financial and commercial architecture with allied countries is working as it seeks to supply its demand for medicines and other hospital supplies.
This popular pharmacy has reopened in the south of Caracas. People come with their prescriptions in order to get antibiotics, medications for hypertension, diabetes, and food supplements for pregnant women.
I've been here several times. This is the third time I've come. I've already received 3 different types of medication since they've reopened: omeprazole, atorvastatin, and now antibiotics.
There is simply not enough money for me to buy medication. It costs a lot of money, and even with my pension, it's not enough.
More than 15,000 people have received free medicine in almost 2 months of operation. Economic sanctions have directly influenced Venezuela's ability to guarantee healthcare as a social right to citizens. This has negatively impacted millions of people here in Venezuela. According to data from the Pan American Health Organization, up until 2016, Venezuela had improved all of its health indicators, including vaccination plans and access to medical care. The Bolivarian Republic also reduced the prevalence of diseases.
A country in economic crisis is one with fewer resources, and those resources are not sufficient to cover the hospital's demands. When you don't have sufficient medicines, when you don't have enough supplies, operating problems at the hospital are exacerbated. In an economic crisis, people are more vulnerable because they do not eat what they are supposed to eat. They get weaker, lose weight, hygiene norms have changed. Issues with the water supply and electrical problems also become more aggravated.
Russia delivered 7.5 tons of medicine to Venezuela on February 21, 2019. To remedy this critical situation, on March 29th, 65 tons arrived from China, and on April 16th, 24 tons from the International Red Cross. According to data from the Health Ministry, Venezuela approved a more than €600 million investment in medicines.
In addition to this commercial agreement for the purchase of supplies, medicines, and surgical equipment, they are making donations through the Humanitarian Technical Assistance Program.
The medicines are stored in this automated warehouse where they store generic medicines from the list of essential drugs.
The storing of medicines at the facility is guided by the Minister of Health and not by a commercial need.
The distribution of medicines to the national public health sector via integral diagnostic centers, hospitals, and social security institutions is controlled and monitored from this room. The objective is to standardize the access and availability of medicines for the Venezuelan people.
The 4 activists who were arrested after being removed from the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C. have been released. This came after a court hearing today. Each activist was charged with 1 class of misdemeanor of interfering with a federal law enforcement agent engaged in protective functions. The charge carries a maximum of 1 year in jail and a $1,000 fine. Their next court date is June 12th. The 4 activists, along with others, had been defending the embassy with the permission of the Venezuelan government. Thursday's forced entry into the embassy by U.S. authorities has been widely condemned as a breach of the Vienna Convention and international law. Earlier on Friday, electricity was restored to the building of the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C. The lights were switched on hours after the Metropolitan Police invaded the diplomatic premises and took away members of the Embassy Protection Collective who were inside. Mexican women organizations have rallied to protest against the detention of child migrants. They demand an explanation over the death of a 10-year-old Guatemalan girl who was in custody of Mexican authorities. The girl died on Wednesday night after arriving the day before with her mother from the state of Chihuahua. Mexican top human rights official says she died after falling from a bunk.
The girl was with her mother, of Guatemalan nationality. She was 10 years old, and she was coming from Chihuahua. She was detained in the state of Chihuahua. The National Immigration Institute brought her from Chihuahua by bus to Mexico City. After that, we do not know what happened. We know she was taken to a hospital and we know she died, but we do not know the circumstances.
Pope Francis has accepted the resignation of Brazilian Bishop Wilson Dias de Oliveira. The bishop is reportedly under investigation for alleged extortion and covering up sexual abuse. In April, he also admitted to police he had taken $4,000 from church funds for personal use, claiming he was having financial difficulties. Pope Francis passed a decree this month making it mandatory for clergy to report sexual abuse. Over a century later, the United States invasion still haunts the people of the Dominican Republic. It started in 1916 when U.S. Marines first arrived for an 8-year occupation.
Although 103 years have passed since the first U.S. military occupation when the U.S. flag was flown over the Ozama fortress, the people of the Dominican Republic will never forget what losing their sovereignty meant.
In 1916, invasion was due to a geopolitical juncture because of the United States expanding its efforts. The U.S. clearly has great interest in this Caribbean area. Haiti had also been invaded in 1915 and 1916, and so the U.S. decided to also intervene in the affairs of the Dominican Republic to retrieve all debts.
Mere days before the intervention, President Juan Isidro Jimenez had stepped down from his seat inside the fortress, which is now in ruins. He had been having problems with the United States and with his War Minister, Desiderio Arias.
He felt as though he had to quit, while still maintaining a dignified position, which at least will stand in time. Of course, he was able to visualize at that moment that sooner or later a wound would be inflicted upon the Dominican nation with the arrival of the troops to Santo Domingo, which finally took place on May 15, 1916.
Urbano Gilbert was among those who led the resistance against the United States intervention. Over a century later, the Dominican Congress has decided to recognize him as a national hero. His remains rest in a humble foss in the cemetery, but will soon be moved to the National Pantheon, where sovereignty is celebrated, as is the significant role women played in defending the country.
Although women were not citizens, they carried out a moral citizenship. They took to the streets where they organized and created the Patriotic Ladies Association, which collected money and raised their voice against the United States occupation.
During the occupation, roads and bridges were built to connect the provinces and also to make the existing sugar mills more profitable. The National Army was created. The period also saw the birth of the torrent system under which lands were legalized, but it was not in the best interest of the Dominican people. It was the U.S. owners who benefited as they significantly expanded their plantations. This no doubt shows that the United States has a history of strategic interference in Latin America and the Caribbean, which still goes on today.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. Police in Algeria have fired tear gas canisters at protesters as tens of thousands of them returned to the streets of Algiers for the 13th successive Friday. The protesters are demanding widespread political reforms and the removal of all officials belonging to former President Abdelaziz Bouteflika's government. Police have heavily repressed protesters at the Central Post Office as they attempted to block the area to demonstrators.
They want to destroy us, but they won't in God's will. We say they all live, and that means they all live, not to tell stories of revenge. We are the ones who choose who represent us and not them.
Protesters in Sudan have cleared roadblocks following an army decision to suspend talks on installing civilian rule. On Thursday, the chief of Sudan's ruling military council announced that talks had been suspended for 72 hours due to what he said was deteriorating security. He also demanded that protesters dismantle barricades, open bridges, and railway lines connected. Protesters said the army was trying to provoke them by delaying the negotiations.
We have removed the bricks according to an agreement and they have given 3 days. And if our demand is made yes, we leave the bricks. But if they do not respond to our demands, then we will bring the bricks back again. And we hope that it will remain as our symbol, to stand for a peaceful demonstration to achieve one's goal of freedom, peace and order. And the demonstration is the right of the youth.
Just over 2 months after Cyclone Idai hit Mozambique, displacing over 1,000 people and destroying a number of towns and villages, restoration efforts continue. Our correspondent, Andre Vieira, traveled to Mozambique along with Cuban medical personnel who are there to help those affected by the storm. He has more details in this report.
We are in the city of Beira, in Mozambique, with the Henry Reed Brigade, made up of Cuban medical personnel, who have been working here for 48 days to provide healthcare to the victims of Storm Idai. These Cuban doctors have treated more than 20,000 people and have performed around 300 surgeries. They are also treating people who come in on a daily basis to this place, which is functioning as a hospital. Citizens tell us they are glad for the aid being offered. We also spoke to the Cuban doctors who have been around the world performing similar humanitarian acts, and they said that they have not only brought healthcare, but also happiness and smiles to those affected by Idai.
Zambia's President Edgar Lungu has challenged mining companies that are unhappy with the government policies to leave the country. The government wants to replace the value-added tax with a sales tax. Mining firms are not in agreement and have threatened to cut down on the number of employees. Lungu also says he is consulting with his Attorney General on ways of disengaging mining firms that have been exploiting Zambians.
Thank you very much for coming to the edge of the miners and for coming to the edge of the copper belt so that we can now look for another investor who come and replace KCM. And this also will send a signal to any mining company that you misbehave in terms of not fulfilling what their mandate at the time they took over the mines.
A court in Kenya has found former President Daniel Arap Moi guilty of land grabbing. Moi, who ruled from 1978 and 2002, has been ordered to pay $10 million to the rightful owners of a property he illegally sold to a timber firm in 2007. His lawyers claimed the land was his to sell. However, the judge upheld a claim from the family of a now deceased local chief who accused Moi of abusing his position to seize a property from him in 1983. In a villa in Misrata, Libya has turned into a hive of activity as mothers prepare food parcels with messages for sons battling on the outskirts of the capital. More than 10,000 food parcels are being sent each day 200 kilometers away to the front for the unrecognized fighters in south of Tripoli. Around 100 women work in 2 shifts a day.
For our sons and for the sake of the nation, we are ready to pay a dear price for the homeland, and for Misrata especially, because it gave us a lot of, and it is our duty to give back, even if it's a small part of what our children have given us and what this good country has given us.
The Rwanda Investigation Bureau has paraded before the media a leading member of a rebel movement. Calix Nsabimana is accused of acts of terrorism and he faces a life imprisonment in line with the country's new terrorism law. Nsabimana, the spokesman for National Liberation Front, appeared in public for the first time since he was captured in Comoros on April 13th and secretly handed to Rwandan authorities. He has previously declared war on the Rwandan government. The German Historical Museum has announced it will return a 15th century monument to Namibia after it was taken during the colonial era. The stone cross is a Portuguese navigation landmark that was placed on the southwest African coastline in 1486. But when the area was under German colonial control in the 1980s, the cross was taken and moved to Europe. Namibia asked for its return in 2017, and on Friday, the Berlin Museum formally agreed to the request. Germany has also pledged to return artifacts and human remains to its former colonies. Thousands of Palestinians in the occupied East Jerusalem have participated in prayers of the second Friday of Ramadan at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The prayers took place under intense security measures by Israeli security forces. Men over 40, children under 13, and women of all ages are allowed to enter East Jerusalem without permits for the Friday prayers. Men under 40, however, are banned. The Al-Aqsa Mosque compound is the third holiest site in Islam. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. May 17th marks the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia. And marking the day, Taiwan has become the first country in Asia to legalize same-sex marriage. Taiwanese lawmakers passed a law allowing same-sex couples to form exclusive permanent unions and be able to apply for a marriage registration. Hundreds of LGBTQ activists gathered outside Taipei's parliament as a legislative debate got underway over the bill. In recent months, conservative and Christian groups had been advocating for the bill to be dropped. and instead pass legislation that offers something closer to limited same-sex unions.
Today's a very significant day to us because we could finally pass a law that could protect my family. We've been fighting for this change since for 5 years for me personally, before I even had children. And now that I do, it means even more.
And the French city of Bordeaux has unveiled a rainbow-colored pedestrian crossing to mark International Day against homophobia, transphobia, and biphobia. The crossing was created as a symbol of the fight against discrimination and to promote awareness of the struggle of the LGBTI community places public spaces. A recent study of the LGBTQI community shows that 83% of them have suffered discrimination or aggression in the last year.
This new pedestrian crossing is a symbol of inclusion, of the fight against discrimination, and of the fight against homophobia and transphobia. To say that everyone has a place in public spaces, whatever their sexual orientation or gender identity.
And finally, Spanish LGBTQI organizations are reporting a crisis in a country that once was a pioneer in the defense of LGBTI rights.
According to a survey by international organization ILGA, Spain is no longer part of the 10 European countries that are more respectful with LGBTI rights. The country used to hold second place back in 2011. Now a lack of national laws and the decision to force trans people to take a psychiatric diagnosis have put the country much lower in the list.
For instance, we need to ban therapies that allegedly cure homosexuality. You can find them in half of the regions, and there is not punishment for such horrible therapies.
After 7 years without any new legislation, advances or sanctions to protect the community, Spain is living a huge crisis according to some organizations.
The main proposal is the approval of a specific law to defend the LGBT community and also specific laws for trans people, so we can amend all the discriminations in our country.
According to the National LGBTI Federation, homophobia, biphobia and transphobia have been normalized in Spain, and between 60 and 80% of cases are not reported. Maribel suffered one of those crimes.
Two individuals came close to me, and when they realized I'm trans, they attacked me, saying you're a fag, and punched me, leaving me lying on the floor.
Besides social abuse, the trans community suffer labor, education and health discriminations.
If I'm not recognized within the system, what are my rights? What happens if, as a woman, I suffer a sexist attack because of my gender? What happens if I have to go to jail? Which jail? What happens if I have to go to a healthcare center or a hospital?
LGBT groups demand that May 17 be a celebration day to commemorate the progress made until now, but also as a day to demand real equality.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.